not just surveys and focus groups. We're looking at tools on how you can measure how well your project has performed, which is a, a sort of a pet topic of mine. I'll explain as we go through. Now let's start with a quote. The goals are dreams with deadlines. And that's how we see a project. If you're going to evaluate the success of something, it could be ongoing, but at the end of the day, it has to have a sort of like a change aspect to it. So what we do here is we look at what do we want to achieve by a certain point in time. And that's what we can measure. We can measure the change. Okay, who am I? My name is Pat Gross, I was thinking about evaluation and thinking about the simple evaluation questionnaires. I used to work for a market leader over in the UK or in the European Union, actually. And one of the biggest successes or the recipe to success that we had in that unit was we used to always put out the post-workshop, post-conference evaluation form, and we would follow up. And to me, it was quite a harrowing task because what I would find is that people could be critical, but I also had to be learned to be tough at the same time because basically sometimes they can be critical, but I can bet you bottom dollar we'll see them at the next event and the event after that. So yes, be prepared to take some hard learnings, but at the same time, also be mindful of the fact that it could be, what the person's mood was on that particular day. So what we did in addition is that we actually put out pre-course questionnaires or pre-workshop. And so what happened then was that we were able to tailor what we were going to deliver. And therefore, we improved the result at the end. So even at that point, we were introducing what we call benchmark and summative, because there needs to be a starting point and there needs to be a final point. Now, I used to work in a government department and I was on a reference group for an evaluation tool called Measuring Impact. And after leaving and setting up my own business, lo and behold, I became one of 4 trainers that spent 3 years training community groups, community partnerships across the state of Victoria on how to evaluate using the Measuring Impact tool. At the same time, I was also using other evaluation frameworks in other projects that I was involved in or projects that we were commissioned to evaluate. I've evaluated a few funded projects over the years, and I'm also very active when it comes to helping clients put together grant applications. There's always going to be a question about how you're going to measure success. So I've got my stock standard blurb, so to speak, which I can bring to the table. And at the same time, I've also designed evaluation plans for clients. As I said, projects are about change, and there's no change that can't be measured. And I do play a game with a few times with people who have said to me, "Oh, I'll give you this scenario, blah 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 blah," and it's amazing actually when you think about it. Oh, I could actually show them how to measure that change. A good example I can think of was somebody who said they took older people to the church once a week and gave them a meal. How do you evaluate that? So I started to help them unpack the thinking as to why they were doing that in the first place. Were these people older people? Were they isolated? Were they separated from family? Were they in a multicultural community that weren't engaged, etc.? So we looked at, well, what you needed to do at that point was to collect where they were before they started to take part in those meals, etc. So we worked through that process of how do you capture that information. That was the part that they had been missing. So I just want to give you a flavour there that you can measure change, but you have to be able to capture where the person or situation is at before you start. So what is project evaluation? It's a systematic, and objective assessment of an ongoing or completed project to determine the relevance and level of achievement of the objectives, development, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and sustainability. And that is the official description from the International Labour Organization. So what is change? Well, you can think about this. What has changed? What results have changed? What's been the impact of change? Impact is the consequence of an outcome. So you'll have an output, you do an action, there'll be an outcome, but from the outcome becomes an impact. How it made a difference more widely than the outcome you're looking for. Relevance, the relevance of the project, was there actually a need for it? Were they the target group priorities? Was it relevant to them? Efficacy, achievement of the objectives. How well did you do that? Effectiveness, the purpose, the outputs, the activities. How effective were they? Efficiency, time-saving costs, resources, etc. And sustainability, that's lasting change, that's continuity. What have you learned that you can take into the future? So those are just some ideas of what change might look like and what you might want to look at when you're evaluating a project. Okay, so this project is this information session. This is actually about the different ways that you can capture the evidence to estimate how successful you've been with your project. And as I've already sort of intimated, and these are words that you'd be putting in an application form somewhere, definitely. Benchmarking, what you do at the beginning, what information you catch, what's the state of play, how are people feeling at that time, what's the problem at that time. Formative is capturing points along the way that's showing how the situation is changing. And then summative is what you do at the end of an allotted time frame, and that goes back to the benchmark and to measure the change journey. And also you'll be looking at two different kinds. You'll be looking at qualitative, which is more like how people are feeling, senses, etc. And quantitative, which is data, which is numbers. Usually working with some government departments, a lot of the focus and evaluation tends to boil down to numbers, bums on seats, etc. Whereas the real magic lies in the qualitative data that you can collect, because you can use that qualitative information not just to inform your own organization, but you can use it to create the stories and the emotion that you want to get out there when you're looking at the next step. Next step might be more funding, but you might be wanting to lobby local government, lobby somebody out there for more funding, etc., or lobby for change. So as you're collecting information along the way, don't forget that the emotional side of things, which whether you're interviewing somebody or capturing a case study, a story, they actually work for your organization in the end in a far better way than just collecting pure data. Okay, so today we are talking about the different methods or different tools you can use to collect information, to collect evidence. Now, first of all, I started with surveys and focus groups. So let's start with surveys. Yes, surveys are great, as long as you're using the same questions at each stage of the process, because that's a good clinical way of measuring change. And be mindful of the open and closed questions. The closed questions are yes and no ones, which then open up to the ones that you want to probe some questions, which then you bring back to closed questions. So you're doing a bit of a I've forgotten it now, but an egg timer approach type thing, upside down egg timer. You find that surveys are great. You can there's online forms as well as the written forms you can use. So there's no reason why you can't use surveys. I certainly use them a lot, especially when I'm doing strategic planning and getting information from the community. It's great to just use them. Likert scales, the happy faces or the lines, etc. They're good for certain kinds of people that you're trying to communicate with. People who may have ongoing issues. They may prefer to be able to show you their status rather than have to overcome the barrier of trying to explain to somebody how they're feeling, which they don't want to do. But Likert scales, or the line across the page where you might have 0 to 10 and you put the line about 8, what you think of something, is also a good indicator. Surveys can be written, verbal, or online, and there can also be just checklists just to make sure you've covered all the facts and make sure people understand them. Okay, focus groups. I've got somebody on team who's got a good sense of humor, so that's the reason why we've got the little bit of a cartoon there. Focus groups, oh yeah, definitely. Even pre-benchmark. I'm putting an application in with a client at the moment, and I said to them straight off, I said, you need to do some focus groups before we even get to putting our pen to paper, basically, because it's a good way of finding out where your community is at in order to justify your argument for applying for funding. So they sat down, they did the focus groups, and they came out with information that they never dreamed, because we all make assumptions, but actually, so they're getting people together, coming up with ideas. So that was what, so I'll make sure with focus groups, they're a good sample audience of who you're trying to affect change. They're good for ideation, generating ideas. I remember not too long ago being involved doing a series of focus groups in a community for the use of a disused building. And it's interesting there because each focus group, first of all, there was a focus group of interest. So there might have been, the focus group was probably in one case was all young mums. So they had their idea of how this building should be used. Another of the focus groups was young people. And so they had their idea. And then we had about 4 or 5 different groups of interest. So we were able to sample the different kind of audiences and what their thinking would be before we took it to the next stage, which is more of a community consultation. I haven't covered this on the slides, but you could use a World Cafe approach because that's still part of the evaluation, because you're looking at how things are changing. Feedback from stakeholders, feedback from community, feedback from specialists, etc. Feedback is a good evaluation. So if you're talking about, we're going to do this, and the way we're going to find it is surveys, focus group. Feedback is a good tool to use. Focus groups can be rather subjective, so you've got to be mindful of that as well. And you must avoid group think. And again, I gave you an idea there where we have specific ones, but there has been focus groups where it's good to have a really good facilitator who can stop somebody dominating the conversation. Because if you find everybody swaying towards one opinion, when what you want to do is to get a good flavor across the group. And focus groups are really good for qualitative information. All right, I promise you I'm starting with the dry ones, and then I'm going to end up with some really interesting tools. Well, I think they're interesting anyway. Data. Yes, we have to have data. And again, as I said, the quantitative stuff, the stuff that government department wants, they want to know, what the situation is right at the beginning, the ABS data, the economic data, the unemployment data, something that is tangible and is measurable and it's real. So if you can collect the data, that external data, and think about it, how that would impact as your project goes, and then at the end, there's the internal data, and we tend to forget the internal data. Internal data in your own organization, the information, the attendance, the stuff like that in well, I've given you a good one there, the attendance, sort of participation, participation rates works well in some sectors, for instance, the education and the neighborhood house sector, where data is actually used pretty well, especially when it comes to arguing for government support. I said it's got to be short, medium, and long. The other thing about data is minutes of meetings and reports, because that is actually a good source of evidence. Looking in the minutes, you can see who attended the meetings. You can collect data there from, there is data you can collect from meeting minutes. So they're records and they are actually relevant. Okay, documentation review. There's no need to interrupt programs if there's already documentation in existence. It gives comprehensive and historical information. One of the biggest problems with evaluation or with projects is that I don't know if you people are listening here, but I have come across projects which people have done, but what they've done is reinvented the wheel, because somebody has already done that a few years before. Sometimes corporate history goes out the window when people leave, but the problem's still there. So they then, a few years later, they revisit the same problem. The records have disappeared. Now, wouldn't it be good if there was already those records in place? I've actually been able to help out clients where I've had a long history with them, and I've been able to supply them with the evaluation and some of the reports from previous projects that they weren't aware of, because people changed. So as I said, there's research documentation, there's already information already out there. Just make sure that, information that's already exists, bring that into the evaluation. Okay, now then, individual tools. Debriefs. A few years ago, I was evaluating a project. It was a 3-year project. And in the project, it was very much social connection. And there was a lot of know, like, and trust that needed to be built with between the community and the project facilitators. But there was some emotional strain. I'm not a counsellor, so it's not at that kind of level. But what we did every quarter was we would do a debrief. I would do a debrief with each of the facilitators, so that they could actually unpack what had happened over the last 3 months and move on. That turned out to be a really good tool. I know people, you talk about supervision in some sectors or whatever, that's not what we were doing, but that's, similar thing. But as an evaluation tool, as long as you don't identify a situation, it captures that progress of the project as you go along. And then there's a reflection, what went well, etc. That's important when you're looking at the formative stages, because you want to know, and you can make changes as you go. You can't make changes unless you reflect and sort of figure out what the situation is. Okay, so community. What are the tools you can use with respect to the community? Well, of course, you can get community feedback. Reference groups. Now, there's a confusion between reference groups and steering groups. A steering group for a project is around, has a level of making decisions. It's a high-level group that monitors the project, maybe partners involved, but the whole point of that is that if there's changes to be made, the steering group has got some level of recommendation or authority. A reference group is just that, a reference group. It's like the advice that you can have a reference group in the community, and you can keep referring to the reference group. And reference group feedback will feed into the evaluation, will feed into the change, will feed into the direction, will feed into the efficacy, will feed into the project. So they're an important tool. If you can actually put together a reference group and use them effectively, then you've got an effective tool as part of your evaluation. For some projects, you'll need a critical friend. A critical friend could be an expert in a field. I'm thinking on bushfire recovery. I've been working on a few of those projects. And there is a critical friend I can think of who's a professor or something in that space. And he's there to advise and to community groups who are doing work in the bushfire recovery area or bushfire resilience space. So if you've got a project with critical that can have a critical friend, then use them, because that can then be used to demonstrate how your project is changing, moving, and ensure that you're going to get the success that you're looking for. Community conversations. Not specifically reference groups, but just go back into the community, have informal conversations with people, capture that information, bring it forward. Again, it's useful to be able to report that and to contribute to looking at the success of your project. And then speak ups, you might just organize, specific events where you get people to talk about a certain topics. Okay. Sorry, can you just bear with me just a second? I do apologize. All right, so next step, interviews. Interviews are always an important tool. You could be interviewing specialists out there, you could be interviewing government, critical friends, etc. Face-to-face to contact, to probe further. They're structured. So you can be asking different people the same questions. Again, a really good evaluation process shows multiple, but at the same time, you have got structure in place. They're informed people. So I'm thinking of again, a bushfire recovery project that I was involved in, a specific one. And we interviewed in depth somebody who'd been involved in the Black Saturday fires back in 2009. They were informed people. So they were actually informing our project, giving us information, giving us their experience, which we then used as part of the project and the decision making that we made, and we're able to measure against that criteria. And then you've got those spontaneous vox pops to gain opinions of the general public. So go out there and find out what they think about a certain thing or a certain change that's going on. So there are a whole, host of little tools that you can use in the interview space. All right, observation. I always add observation, because that covers the things that the intangibles that we look and we see. We see changes, we see things that people are doing. And I always say observation is important, but make sure that you don't do it in isolation. It's actually a good tool to add to other tools, because it gives more accurate information about how a program actually operates. The people actually on the ground who are seeing, the facilitators, the program managers who are seeing the change, or the department managers, they're observing changes. Capture that information, because it actually informs the processes and it shows changes in behaviors. It's a great tool. Just add another tool to it to strengthen. Now, this is where it starts getting interesting. One of the most effective tools I've seen in evaluation is what we call a collaboration chart or a networking map. And it demonstrates changes in relationships between the different organizations when engaging with stakeholders or the community. Now, I'll give you an example. We've actually taken out anything, hopefully, that identifies this one. It's a real case study. It was a learning centre, and at the beginning of the project, I have to tell you that those lines they're either thin lines, thick lines when it should said job actives, not job activities. But a thick line means there's a very strong relationship between the learning centre and the job active. The other lines means there's relationships, but there's nothing sort of you can write home about. You could have a dotted line, which means there's just a connection, but nothing formal. Or you could have no lines. So, for instance, where it says facility hirers, you could actually, in another version of this, have facility hirers staying outside there with no line between the learning centre. So it's actually a good visual to map out where you are at when it comes to engaging your stakeholders at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end. Now, what we're going to show you is a beginning and the end, because this was only about a 7-8 month project. But this was about getting out there and connecting with other stakeholders in the community. So that's what it was like at the beginning. Then 6 months later, you can see that there's stronger relationships overall. But with the Learning Centre, for example, they had, there was a Catholic school, they developed a relationship. There was a public specific relationship, so public primary school with a college, a preschool, etc. Out there, some strong relationships have been developed. And strong relationship with TAFE. I mean, in the original, there was a relationship, but there's even stronger one actually in this particular instance. It's not showing here. Local businesses, state government, services, women's referral service, they all became very strong relationships as a consequence of the project. And what happened was that the project itself, we actually invited people from the different stakeholders to come and do a presentation or come and meet with our group of learning centres. And as a consequence of that, they got to know more about what these other agencies were doing. And in some cases, they had considered them as competitors. And by just building that initial relationship, actually encourage these organizations, these learning centers to go out and do some more door knocking on their own, right? Because they felt more confident and more comfortable about knowing what these other agencies were doing. So this is like, this is what it came to. So they got more stronger relationships with men's sheds, learning centers, neighborhood houses, started relationships with churches and the cricket club, etc., welfare groups. But I mean, this is just an example. I do remember a project around men many years ago when again, it was another learning centre, had a sort of like a small sort of example when they started. And when they finished, they did a presentation in Melbourne, and that page was absolutely crowded with different services and different agencies. And it's just a stark contrast. If you want to know how well you did, looking at a networking map is a good visual. Case studies and good news stories. Capture the case studies because they are the emotion. When I was training, we would bring together all the projects at the beginning of the start of the year. And we would, as part of the workshop, we would split into 4 groups. And at the one point, I was the newbie. And I was told, oh, you've got to do the final report. And I thought, yeah, what's wrong with that? Because that was the one they didn't want to do. And they didn't actually realize, actually, I really enjoy doing that because I was able to talk about the final report, and this is the kind of evidence you need, the quantitative evidence, etc. But I said, that's only part of the story. If you want to measure and if you want to use the information that you have collected or collect good quality information Start collecting the stories, start video recording people's experiences, of course, with their permission, and capture as you go along, because by the time you finish, you can create a portfolio of stories that you can then package together and go lobby and go, look for more money elsewhere, or lobby for change. There's different things you can do. Doing an evaluation isn't just about satisfying somebody else's tick the box, so to speak. You do a good evaluation and collect the qualitative as much as the quantitative, and you can use that information to create your own objectives. It's not about a funder or a third party. It's about what you can learn. Also, when you're doing this, you can see that there are problems or new problems come along, so you can use that for the next funding. But whatever, especially in today's age where video, etc., and podcasts are the in thing, think about collecting information as you go along that can be packaged together at the end to create something that is going to be emotive and attract some further investment, shall we say. Good News Stories, GNS. I'm part of a network who every week, thinking about 3 of them doing that now. They want to know good news stories, good news stories, good news stories. Because if you capture the good news stories, you get them out in the press, or on social media or on your website. They're inspiring and motivating, and they generate that positive energy that's going to help you to get the results you're looking for. So this is more of an inspirational tool, but it also keeps you on track. It's something to be mindful of, because you can get so bogged down in things that are going wrong. Okay, storytelling, more significant change. Again, I remember there was a project and it was about literacy, there's literacy and numeracy. It was a rural project, and there was quite a few women involved, and they told their story. If you can capture people's stories, and then their stories are individual, but if you then analyze those stories and filter them, you will find common threads. And that's what's called most significant change. You can use it in business, you can use it in the community. But the idea being that you can, everybody's got their own personal story to tell. And they're going through a program of change, which the program is constant, or for all of them, but each one will have their own individual experience. But when you listen to these people, it's good to listen to them, but you'll also find there are some common threads of experience, and you can, and through that, you're quantifying. So you can tell the stories, but at the same time, you can say, out of 16 participants, 14 of them sort of experienced this. So you can put some data in there using most significant change. All right, this one, not many people use. This is the final one, but I would say not people are aware of. But it was somebody who used to be in the travel industry, and she told us about this, and I thought this was absolutely brilliant, because there are some people, and that could be young people, for example, because young people can be quite creative. They're not going to tell you, especially that the down and out 16-year-old sort of there's got sort of problems and does want to know. They're not going to tell you exactly what they think, but give them something creative to work with, and created to freely express their experience. Then you're going to, again, this is the most effective tool that you can use. I think with young people, I'm thinking of wall art or something like that. We were doing a project a few years ago, and it was a few years ago, when it was all about digital storytelling. And the success of that project, especially because we had a youth group, was that their ability to tell their stories, and at the same time, we had to make sure it didn't get dark, but it was showing their journey. So there was that was a good sort of evaluation process there as well. So look, MASH, memories and special highlights. If you can do something creative, some people can actually express their change, and you can capture that for your own evaluation purposes. So what we're going to do is we'll actually send to people, but there is a link there to there's a list of these tools which we can show everybody, and I'll share with everybody. And earlier this year we did a couple more of these information sessions. One was in evaluation basics, which is on YouTube, and designing your evaluation plan is another one we did. So this is like the third component, which we left until close to the end of the year. We actually, before with a couple of more slides to go, we can help you, by the way, if you're looking for evaluation and you're not quite sure what to do, or you've got a big project, we can help you develop the plan. We can help you design the tools that you can use, and we can help you carry out the evaluation. We're here to help, and all you have to do is just book an appointment at that link, which we'll make available. So that was a sort of walk through the tools. Next time, we're going to actually look at how to promote your idea for funding using a pitch deck. Now, this is about how do you present yourselves to corporates or to other organizations in such a way to get your case across. And it might, some of you, it may sound like a no-brainer, but we actually have been talking to people from the other side of the fence who say that actually they get approached by organizations who actually are not, they're not aligning to what these businesses are looking for. So we're going to have a look at that next time. And then coming up, we've got a special treat because I'm talking to somebody overseas at the moment who has got a new tool which actually looks at programs and services that you can generate based on your mission statement. So that's all I can say at the moment, but exciting times are ahead.